Hello everyone. Thank you for showing your interest in our irregular webinar sessions about ontological security studies. Today we are going to talk with Dr. Vuslat Nur Şahin about her take and about her insights on ontological security studies. First, I'm gonna introduce her, then I will give the floor to her. Dr. Vuslat Nur Şahin is graduated from Graduate School of International Culture and Communication at Waseda University in 2023. She holds a BA in International Relations with a minor in Corporate Finance and M.Sc in International Relations from Middle East Technical University. She has previously worked as an analyst at the Center for Eurasian Studies, where she authored commentaries on South and Northeast Asia. Her research focuses on comparative regional, non-traditional security within the Asian Supercomplex, with a particular emphasis on Japan. She is also an alumna of the DAAD, German Academic Exchange Service, and Japanese Government Scholarship. So without further delay, I'm giving the floor to Dr. Vuslat Nur Şahin.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sofuoğlu. I would like to share a slide with you. Hope you can see clearly to the slide and me and hear me as well. Firstly, I would like to say thank you to all of you to just find some time to listen to me and my presentation of ontological security studies. First thing first, I would like to express my thanks to Erman and Nasuh hocam, because they are very kind and about their invitations, and they are very helpful during the preparation process. Today, I will talk about challenges in globalizing ontological security studies, assessing current realities and future prospects. You may ask that, are you an expert of the ontological security studies? My answer is no. I am working on ontological security studies, but my main expertise in the critical security. But I can tell you a story about why I am not an expert of ontological security studies. Firstly, about my experience in Japan, and then I will talk a little bit more detail about my experience in Asia, a little bit comparative with the other regional aspects, and what are the main critiques about ontological security studies? What should be better? What should be more useful for the future progress? I think, I hope it will be helpful for your research too, and I'm very open to any critiques. Especially, I would like to say that this is an kind of part, this presentation, I'm so sorry, why it is? It is a part of forum article, which we submitted and get revised and resubmit, hope to get published soon. And for the interest about Japan and ontological security studies, I will publish an article next month in Journal of International Relations, Uluslararası İlişkiler Dergisi, about Japan's historical narratives and self-identity, to have more idea about Japan and ontological security studies. Today, I will talk a little bit about my research background and my motivations behind the working on ontological security studies, my ethnocentric experience and understanding the structural problems of the ontological security, my critical questions and my critical thoughts and future hopes about ontological security studies. As Nasuh hocam mentioned, that I am the alumni of the DAAD, German Academic Exchange Center. I had the chance to be in Germany 2 different times in my 2 different academic level. During that time, I realized that lots of students have very Western-oriented mindset about international relations, and I don't want to be going in that way. And I choose different pathway for my academic career, which is most of the Turkish young students not choosing. I decided to go to Japan to study my PhD, because I thought that if I want to understand the Asian context, I need to be in Asia. It is very objectively, but I thought that based in West and working on East is not good strategy for me. And I decided to go to Japan, and my journey started in this way. Because in my first year, in very traditional PhD student-wise, I decided to write a proposal, find a research question, looking at the literature, like all of this stuff, all the first year PhD students done. And my research question during that time, also it is my first and last question during the PhD, how would Japan contribute to non-traditional security in Asia? Maybe you are not very familiar of the Japan's context. It is very understandable. Briefly, Japan is not traditional armed country. Since the end of the Second World War, Japan has self-defense force instead armed force, which is very limited capability and capacity. The capability and capacity is limited by the Constitution of Japan until the 2015. In 2015, there are some slight changes, but in practical wise, still Japan hasn't got a traditional armed force. Instead of that, it has self-defense force. But on the other hand, Japan is one of the most important economic power in the world, one of the most influential soft power in the world. In the region, it is one of the biggest aid giver. And I try to understand how a country without traditional armed force can contribute to security. In here, security doesn't necessarily mean traditional armed security, but other alternative security fields. My PhD is focused on environmental and economic security, but when I'm designing my project, this is the initial question, like how non-traditional security in general in Asia. And for doing so, I started to read the literature about the critical security, because I thought that critical security may answer better since I am looking at the critical security fields. And I came across the ontological security studies. And maybe in here you can ask why non-traditional security is important in Asia, because it is very daily based practiced security issues. For example, natural disasters, food security, water security is very important aspects of the daily life in Asia, and they need to invest more on these topics. It is quite different than the Western counterparts. And as a result of this situation, their security understanding is quite different. In Turkey, for example, or in Europe, when we are talking about Asian security, we are thinking some very common themes like China sea security, Kuril Island security, but in Asia, in reality, there are different dynamics and research on the security issues. As a result of this situation, when I'm looking for the critical security studies and ontological security studies as well, I came across the ontological security studies self-stability part, because I realized that the countries in Asia invest more on their own self-stability, self-understanding, and others to locate themselves in terms of the human security perspective. For example, in the case of Japan, although governments time to time try to change nature of Japan's self-defense force to be more active armed force, Japan's public opinion defines itself as an pacifist, and they are very disagree about this kind of the armization progress. And after that, as a very traditional PhD student again, I started to ask professors about what they think about the ontological security studies and my research. In here, I tried to understand their reaction, like, is it good theory to work on my question or not? But the answer is quite shocking for me, because they said that they don't know what is ontological security studies. You may ask that when was it happen? I started my PhD in September 2019. It is happening in 2019, end of 2019, 2020, which is, at that time, I learned that ontological security studies is always a thing, but in my case, not a thing, because like I wrote some example answers of the professors. Like, one professor said to me, ontological security, whose ontology? The problem starts in the beginning. Or another professor said to me, ontological security is very new and you should wait. If you want to use the critical approach, it is better to adopt Copenhagen school. It has already proved itself. Like this kind of answers, I got it. And my first initial reaction is, oh, maybe it is very Japanese thing. Like maybe in the academia of Japan is not very aware of ontological security studies. But in the similar time, I had a chance to join a workshop with very prestigious Chinese universities. And I had the chance to ask the Chinese professors about what do you think about ontological security studies? The answer is quite similar with the Japanese professors. They said, we don't know what is it. And I thought as I'm like young PhD students, oh, maybe it is better to give up in here because ontological security studies still developing concepts, maybe just not working on it. I only got one positive answer through this process. And this was a professor not located or from Asian universities. The professor is based in the Western institutes, said me it is a good outlet to work on ontological security studies and Japan security understanding. But since I only get one positive answer, I just decided to give up ontological security studies. I am telling this boring story to you to telling why I'm thinking of how I realized some problems of ontological security studies. Because after that year, in 2021, I had a chance to join my first annual ISA. And in here, I was quite shocked because there are lots of ontological security studies sessions, presentations, very important professors in there. And I saw professors still in the audiences. He is one of the professors I met during this ISA. And I was quite shocked because I realized that the ontological security studies is a thing, very well developed, and there are lots of discussions going on. My first question is, where is ontological security study and where am I? Because when you are looking at the presenters, they are either from Western institutes or they are from West already. Like there are none of the Asian or African scholars working on ontological security and presenting in this ISA. And I just thought, oh, okay, is it Western-oriented thing or how we miss the development of the ontological security study? I have some kind of mixed feelings. And when I came back to Japan, I had lots of questions in my mind. I remember one of my cohorts asked me, how was the ISA? I said, I felt myself an exotic animal because like lots of scholars show interest to me, someone coming from Japanese institutes, but at the same time, I saw myself the theoretical asymmetry between Asia and the Western context, and it was a very shocking experience for me. And actually, I studied in very good university in Japan, and I had contact with other good universities in Japan, and I quite know the academic situation in there. And after it, for my PhD dissertation, I was conducting interviews with 3 different groups. And one of these groups are the academicians. And I decided to add one more question, actually a couple of questions on my interviews. I asked their opinion about critical security. Do you think that critical security helps to understand Japanese security mindset? You may ask that why you are asking critical security. We are talking about ontological security studies. But as I mentioned before, they don't know what is ontological security studies. For that reason, I decided to pick the question, critical security is a very big umbrella term. And 2 answer is very, like I got 20 answers for these questions. They are quite similar, but 2 of them is very, I think, enlightening for me. One is that, let me to look at the origins of the critical security, none of them from Asia, how we relate with it. And the other one is that, I don't know why, but Western scholars like to work on new instead of deep on established one. There are like 2 main points in here. The first thing first, I feel that they are quite right, because when you are looking at the ontological security articles, all of them starting in historical background of ontological security studies. When you are looking at the name and philosophical background, all of them from the West. I know that philosophy is universal. It is not a regional thing, but I can understand why Asian scholars couldn't relate themselves with the ontological security studies, since it is very Western mindset oriented in the philosophically and background wise. And the second one is that when I'm seeing these critiques of the new and established one, I decided to check the literature about how Western scholars think about it. And I saw that Andrew New also criticized critical security scholars about the neophilia. And he also said that maybe it is better to invest more on established one instead of the new one. But I would like to say that it shouldn't be necessarily fault of the ontological security studies. It is a dual relations. At the same time, in my context in here, it is the context of the Asia. But when I'm talking with some scholars from the Africa, they also say similar experience of themselves. I think in this way, it is very maybe general context. The first thing is that because these countries first adopt their international relations understanding from the United States, their initial thought about the IR and security is very mainstream security. And as a result, the critical security studies have small impact in those areas. The second thing is that they don't necessarily work on established theoretical approach on critical security, because what they did as an security-related research turned to Asian IR, and they didn't locate themselves as a part of security studies network. Instead of it, firstly they locate themselves Asian IR, then global IR. Now they have different type of IR, Chinese IR, Japanese IR, like country-related IR experience. The third one is, since they have important relations with the hegemon itself, in here United States, they thought that they may need to adopt mainstream IR understandings to understand the United States. For that reason, mainstream IR is worked more in those areas. This is the, I think, negative side, or maybe lack of the Asian context in terms of the ontological security studies. But when we are looking at ontological security studies, maybe my perspective is quite too much critical. I am open to any kind of critiques about it. My experience is ontological security studies somehow Western-centric. Although nature and mission is not it, but in the end of the day, practice is it. How? Because when we are saying, if we are saying that ontological security studies are globally applicable, and if we are ignore the other continents' historical and philosophical experiences, how can we suggest that ontological security studies are applicable in the globally? The second one is very related to the first one. I think the biggest gap for Asia, in Asian understanding, historical background and philosophical background is very important to understand the theory. And there are lots of phenomena in Asia could only be understanding the philosophical background of Asian countries, like Shintoism, Taoism, Confucianism. If you are ignoring them, it is so hard to understand. But ontological security studies for studying on quite discourage it. How, for example, if I write an article about Kyoto School and ontological security studies, where should I publish it? Should I send big journals, or should I send, for example, Japanese journals of the political science? Like, audience are very limited in here. And as I mentioned, global IR and Asian IR is discouraging term for the scholars from Asia, because they thought that we are, for example, we are working on international organizations where we are global IR scholars. We are contributing to theory, but we are named as an global IR scholars or Asian IR scholars. This is kind of critiques I heard too much during my PhD years, and I'm quite agree with them about it. And questionable academic inclusion in here, when you are looking for the cooperation between the Western institutes and Asian institutes, there are very limited cooperation in here. Very small amount of events. There are a couple of reasons behind it. Language is one of the main reasons, I think. But on the other hand, none of the parties are very willing to cooperate with each other. Each of them are happy to enjoy their own cycle and network. I also think that this academic inclusion is an important aspect of lack between the ontological security studies and globalizing it. Another thing is that in here, what I realized, that I don't want to give the name, but if you are typing, for example, in the Google Scholars, Asia and ontological security studies, some of the most cited articles written, actually all of them, most of them written by the Western scholars, it is fine, but couple of them, maybe more of them, written by the scholars who don't know any single word of Asian language, who doesn't have any experience about the Asia, and who didn't cite any Asian scholars. Like, how kind of the academic inclusion are we talking about if we are talking about ontological security study is global phenomenon? At the same time, I am not very pessimist about the future process, because like a couple of years ago, ISA opened the global IR session. I don't know, is there anyone had a chance to join, but last week there was an annual meeting of them in Thailand. I joined them. It is very good because it's a very colorful session. They have more voice. They are willing to discuss more current theories, especially young scholars. I think ontological security studies have more space to be in the global perspective. But at the same time, what is interesting to me in there, there are not lots of like star figures joining in the global IR conferences. Only global IR scholars with global IR scholars, they read their own works published less prestigious journals, less prestigious publishers. Like their visibility is still not well, but increasing. And it is, I think it is, I'm hopeful about the future progress. The second one is that there are more experts on area studies in international relations as well. And I think it is a very good development, because now lots of scholars willing to learn the region's language in Africa and in Asia, and they may cooperate better with their theoretical approach and practical cases in a good way. I think for that reason, I am a little bit optimistic about the area expertises and ontological security studies. Why? Because ontological security studies define itself an very interdisciplinary approach. And I think it is an open thing too. But at the same time, it is risky too, because the ontological security studies borders are very blurred. Sometimes it is hard to say what is ontological security studies and what is not. This is a very Japanese way of critique, I think. This is also pros and cons in inside. On the other hand, as I mentioned, like publish and perish culture unfortunately ignores the Asian scholars. And I would like to talk an anecdote. I talked with one of the important US-based journal editor during a meeting, and I asked him that, do you think your journal is inclusive? He said to me, yes, we are publishing articles from the Europe. I think it is not, it isn't inclusive thing. And a couple of times I heard some Japanese professors complain about how academia is racist against them. Like for that reason, they continue to read and write in Japanese. And this cause limited translated work because Western works translated to the East, but Eastern works are not translated to the West. I think it is similar to the African experience as well with the Asian experience and South. The only exception is Indian academics, but the other Asian scholars experience the similar problems. This is my insights and my critiques. I hope it will be helpful and open more questions and more space to talk about other countries' ontological security studies experiences to better understanding ontological security studies in philosophically, historically, practically. And I'm very thankful to all of you to join me today. I'm very excited to see your questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for such a well-structured, well-prepared presentation. Without further delay, I would like to start the QA session. Arman already wrote down how would you, ask your questions. You can raise your virtual hand or you can just write it down. I guess Enes Arslan would like to have a word. Let's start with Enes. And let's ask Vuslat Hocam first. Vuslat, would you like to answer them one by one or would you like to gather all the questions first, then answer them? Up to you.
Actually, I would like to answer one by one if we have time. But
Yeah,
if we have many questions, like we can collect and I answer it. It's both of them fine.
Yeah, let's go for the former since it's your choice.
Okay. Oh, okay. Then I will answer one by one. But if we have limited time, I will collect the question. Okay.
Okay then.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. This is Enes from Istanbul Medeniyet University. I am a PhD candidate. And I'm excited because the presentation was about theory. And theoretical questions are very limited in academic area, especially in Turkey. So I'm very excited about it. And I have a question about the suggestions from the Asia. And I'm trying to use Bourdieu to include ontological security studies. And I will try to use some of concepts from Bourdieu to understand some of the empirical area. But you are suggesting to use some concepts from Asia also. I'm asking that, do you have any suggestions, like concepts, like names or some scholars that we can use on ontological security studies? Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is also questions in my mind. Nowadays, I'm working on it. I'm looking for the Japan's historical, Japan's philosophical experience on the self-stability. I think it is very depends on the case to case. Untalan, for example, she's from the Osaka University. She wrote an article about the Okinawa migration in the eyes of the Japan's perspective. I really enjoyed this article. I'm suggesting it. I couldn't give a specific name, but I know you are working on the Africa, but you know some figures, like important philosophical and historical figures. When you are looking at their practices and thoughts, it may be useful to frame your research in terms of the ontological security studies, because sometimes cases are very related to their own way of the philosophical thinkers. But at the same time, it is so hard, but there are a couple of the philosophical echoes in Japan. Kyoto Ecole is very, very interesting. I'm suggesting to looking at you because they are differentiating themselves, Asian and West, to understanding their own identity in the 1930s, 1940s. Like this kind of especially wartime philosophical experiences are very important. When we are thinking about, for example, historical experiences of Germany, we are talking about Frankfurt School, but when we are writing about Japan, we ignore the Kyoto School, like it is an asymmetry and an inequality for me. Thank you for the question.
I guess we all would like to hear Bernd Steele's remarks and if there is any questions about the presentation. So let's give the floor to him.
Oh, sorry. I don't need to go next, especially since, especially considering the content of Vuslat's important intervention here. I should be listening rather than talking, but I do have I guess 2 or 3 reflections to throw out there because I really enjoyed this presentation. It's a great way for me to kick off my here in the US our winter break, or break in quotes. It's great to see some very recent and or old friends here on this call, and Vuslat, following your work as I have for a few years now. This is fantastic to hear you organize all of this in the way that you have, and also to find your voice in a way that I think is very powerful and persuasive. And so there's nothing I'm going to do here that I think should change that at all. It's just some reflections that I have. So one of the things I was wondering is the dynamic that you're talking about. When I see it, I definitely see it within ontological security studies, although I'm going to defend it a little bit as a typical status quo person would that's been in this for a little while. But I definitely have seen it in ontological security studies. But what you're talking about is something that's just broadly going on and probably has always gone on in international relations itself. So I'm wondering how much of this you can chalk up to where international relations has always been, whether it was an American social science or a global north. And then how much it is therefore tethered to the dynamics that we see within the ISA as an organization reflecting, if not these tensions, these changes, or these potential shifts or transitions, or if there's something unique about ontological security studies. So that would lead me to my second question is there something then, and you had this on one of your slides, philosophically about ontological security, Lang, Giddens, any of the resources that makes it an imperfect fit outside of or before the modern West. So outside of the West or before. Now, if I could just answer that question in terms of where I'm coming from, ontological security studies, interesting enough, gets that as a critique, and it's kind of opened the way to some great works, including yours, and those and the contributions of folks in this call as well, and outside of this call, in terms of using it to intervene into non-Western societies. And yet, it's kind of always been there, even from almost the beginning. In the 2000s, Katerina Kinval is focusing on India. Aisha Zarakal, Bahar Rumalili, they're looking at Turkey, Aisha Zarakal in Japan. So it's one of those things where it's like, I actually think it's much more flexible than a lot of critical security studies approaches. I think that was always the concern within ontological security studies, is that we were going to get, the same sort of critique that happened to securitization theory about 3 or 4 years ago. And it's like, okay, well, if that comes along, okay, handle it in a inclusive way and listen. But then there's also some context within which ontological security has been applied that was outside of or inclusive of more than just the West. So I think that's maybe my response to the question of philosophically, can ontological security be applied? And there's also the question in terms of epoch. Did we have anything like ontological insecurity before modernity? Is it something that is not necessarily tethered spatially, but temporally? Was there anxiety before modernity? And if there was, what did it look like? How do we know it? How can we ascertain it historically? And I'll shut up here after this last point. But some of this then may not necessarily just be a reflection of IR or a reflection of ontological security studies. It may just be time. You mentioned that there are no stars yet outside of the West or the global North or the hegemonic sort of areas where theory has been developed in terms of IR. But I mean, I'm looking at all of the studies that have been produced just in this decade, and we're only in year 3 going into year 4, if I can sort of reify that time frame. that have been like developed and published. And you mentioned Untalan's study, but even before that, you have Marco Vieira's work, Bilgit and Pilcher. You have Shandut's oncological security applied to Iran. We got work on Thailand, work on India, work on EU within Europe, EU within Africa. And so I actually think there's quite a bit of this stuff happening right now. And you're contributing to that as well in the context of your work on Japan and some other narratives. And so there will be stars. I mean, they're in this room. I'm sure of it. In the making, within the next 5 to 10 years or so. I sure as heck wasn't a star, and I don't even know if I am now. 20 years ago, but to the extent that I'm quote unquote somewhat established, it took a little bit of time. And that's easy for me as an old dude to be able to say, well, you just got to wait a little bit. But I do wonder if some of these dynamics that we see unfolding are not necessarily just reinforcing the hegemony, but the beginning of a transition from a hegemonic period to some sort of counter-hegemonic movement that is opening the spaces and places for the work that I think you and I want to see included and centralized in ontological security studies. I'll shut up. I talked way too much, but you know me. I can talk to you and many of the folks in this room for quite a while. But thanks so much for your intervention. It was wonderful. A great way to kick off my weekend.
I'm very thankful actually for your time to be here. It is like very happy moment for me to also share my thoughts with you, and I'm very thankful for your time. About your questions, like yes, you are right. Like it is the IR or ontological security studies issue. But my interaction is that if ontological security studies claim that it is global and very interdisciplinary, very open to everyone, it should be somehow different than the traditional IR. It should have more space and room. And my personal experience showed me no. The answer is no. Still, how is IR and how is the ontological security studies in the context of Asia very close to each other? But if it is the case, so how can we claim that ontological security studies is different than traditional IR pathway? I think we need to like think more about it. During my research, I asked myself how the critical security studies and ontological security studies in this way. Interestingly, like the Copenhagen School have more audiences in the context of the Asia, but it is the only one. And I think the reason behind it is that Amitav Acharya and Berbuzan works different type of the projects. And Amitav Acharya is the only leading, like I can say maybe one of the leading figure of the Asian IR understanding. Probably this was the reason the Berbuzan is famous in Asia. Like this kind of the connection. And in your second point, yes, there are lots of works on the Asia, like especially in Japan. For example, Lindstrom works, Lerakol works, but let's look at it. They are not from Asia. Like if Turkey is Asia, Ayşe Lerakol is a different category, but it is not. She is based on the Western institutes, and they have like they are not originally from Asia or institutional base. They are not from the Asia. Where is the Asian scholars? Like when you are looking at the university rankings, lots of Asian universities have very good rankings. They have very reputable international relations departments. Where are the scholars? Like, where they publish what they are working, why they are not working on the critical aspects of the international relations. And it leads me your third questions about time. I hope that you are right. I have optimistic feelings about it too. And I think, interestingly, Chinese IR is the very leading thing to raising the voice of other Asian countries' IR understanding. Because when China said that we are not global IR, we are Chinese IR, we are using Confucius, we are using Chinese tradition and history, other countries, for example, Japan, Korea, and Southeast Asia started to say that, oh, okay, we have our own IR tradition, Southeast Asian IR, Japanese IR, Korean IR. I think with the first step of the Chinese IR scholars, it started to transform, especially among the young scholars. They are willing to take more risks to submit their works on international journals and get some harsh criticism time to time, get published time to time. Like, you know, it is a very long process, but my initial experiences are this. I hope this answers your reflections too. Thank you so much.
I guess it's Ali Arslan's turn. If he's,
yeah, thank you for the presentation, Vuslat. Sorry, I can't open up my camera, but I hope my voice is clear, at least.
Yeah, I hear you clearly.
Yeah, great. I have two quick questions on ontological security. Normally, I'm working on not on ontological security. I'm a stranger to the field, but I'm trying to familiarize myself with it because I'm generally working on security studies. So, I think one should know about all of the subtopics we have under security studies. You know, the first question I have is, do you think that the methodological preferences of scholars prevent cooperation between institutions instead of facilitating it? Because, like, if you, for example, like, what methodologies are more popular in ontological security studies, and are they easily learnable or open to making sense of about the findings for those who are not familiar with ontological security studies? Because, like, when it comes to, say, like the statistical methods and so on, and the mainstream methods, some people may find them easier to learn, some people may find them harder to learn. But when it comes to, say, like philosophy-based stuff, Confucius and so on, it takes months to understand their works, and making sense of them and using them to analyze political events, it is way more complicated for a stranger. Do you think these, like, how would you respond to the methodological divisions within security studies, and how do you think can we overcome them? Let's put it that way. And the other question I had is a very quick one. So in your presentation or in your work, whose ontology? Yeah, this whose ontology question. Yeah, we went over it, but we didn't talk much about it. So whose ontology are you more interested in your own studies, and what do you think the future holds for the whose security question that we always implicitly deal with?
Thank you so much for your two very wonderful questions. Actually, in the methodology wise, you are right. Like in the philosophical background, it may take times to understand Asian philosophical perspective. Someone from Turkey, I felt so lucky because Turkish understanding of the philosophy is, although the traditional education is very Western oriented, but in the Turkish understanding of the philosophy, if you are interested in, it is quite familiar to the Asian understanding. For that reason, I feel quite lucky to understand some Asian context than my other Western counterparts. But you are right, it is not an easy progress to understand the philosophical background of all of it. But at the same time, there was another advantages. In Asia, the archivic work is very important, and lots of the scholars can easily reach, except from China, to archivic works, historical documents. They can easily connect some interviews with important figures of the fields. Like, it is very, very easy progress. Like I experienced in my first hand, and it is also very important for ontological security studies, and it could be very beneficial in the context of the Asia. I think it has pros and cons in terms of methodology, but in the cooperation side, I don't think the biggest obstacles about the Western institutes and Eastern institutes are the methods. First, I think it is the language still in a thing. Second, I think the publishing cultures, because, for example, lots of the Asian scholars prefer to publish in the Pacific Review, regional journals. Japanese scholars prefer to publish Japanese studies or Journal of Japanese Political Science. Like they prefer to publish in regional or country-wise journals. If you are asking them, they said, this is not our choice, it is the global conjuncture push us to the regional journals. I don't know. But at the same time, like Western counterparts publishing in thematic journals instead of regional ones, and they have more audiences. They couldn't hear each other's voice, I think. This is one of the obstacles to the cooperation for me. And the second terms, whose ontology, for my research, humans ontological security. I work on human security mostly because of my context. Japan is working and putting too much effort and investments on the human security approach. But this is a very important question, and time to time I'm asking myself, we are talking in a very big context, big concepts, but we are not defining them. I write an article about the Indo-Pacific, for example. We are talking now about the Indo-Pacific, but where is Indo-Pacific and how we suddenly talk about the Indo-Pacific? Like, what kind of a geographical invention is it? Sometimes we started to use some words, but we are not thinking too much about it. This is a good critique for me as well. Yeah, thank you so much.
I guess we would like to hear Bashar Baysal's question now.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me? Thank you very much for this presentation. And my question is also about the Eurocentric nature you mentioned about the ontological security, and you said it's about people. Yes, I understand all of your arguments, like mostly people from Western academia publish, and it's mostly in Western journals, but in its content also. I mean, its content and its I don't know, philosophy. Do you think it's also Eurocentric? Because, for example, you said Copenhagen School is more global than ontological security, and it has more place in Asia, you said. But, for example, when they criticize Copenhagen School securitization theory, they say it is when they, for example, when this dichotomy between security and normal, they say what is normal for Copenhagen School is Western democracy. So it's a Western-oriented approach. Do you think in ontological security also, in its content and philosophy, other than people and journals and etc., do you think it's still Eurocentric?
Thank you, Bashar Hocam, and thank you for your time as well. Like, I think in the nature of ontological security studies and mission of ontological security, the answer is no, they are global. But in the application, when you are looking at the application, because of these tools of the application, like the journals, conferences, cooperation, case studies, the practices is different. I mean, in Copenhagen School is not global. In Asia, it is more visible and recognized by the Asian scholars. I think personally, I don't have any data about it, but I think personally it is because of Amitav Acharya working with the Berbuzan and his friends. Because Amitav Acharya is kind of very important figure in the Asian IR understanding. His books are very important. All of when you are going to Japan and Thailand, Singapore, everywhere, every professor's room has a couple of Amitav Acharya's book. I think this is Copenhagen School has more place, first because of that. Second, in the context of Asia, because of Asian supercomplex theory. Because it is one of the few earliest theories just focusing on Asia, like Asian supercomplex understanding, although it has its own deficit, and they have, we are visible in their eyes. I think maybe because of after the Cold War conjectures of the international relations, it was the first time they have more room, they have more interest on it. It is my personal explaining. I saw some questions in the chat box.
Yeah, there are two more questions, but I guess Erman also would like to raise a question. If
okay.
not, I will jump to the questions on the chat room. Or...
we can go with the chat, hocam.
Okay, then. So the first question is from Jason Ralph. So I'm just reading the question, then you would like to, you can answer. My sense reading Kin's Chinese Confucian Aya is that it claims relationalism and portrays Western Aya as rationalist. In doing that, it largely ignores the relational approach in the West. I think there are bridges to be built along relational lines, and perhaps the social interactionist construction of identity is the contribution OSS can make to that.
I think so. Ontological security studies have enough tools and theoretical background for it. But my biggest concern is that the implication. I think this is the big questions. Like should be, if you wanna establish some bridge, you need to collect scholars from the East and West on the same room to discuss their own experiences and thoughts to establish more coherent, not only for ontological security studies, but also for the global IR. Because I am thinking that in the case of Japan, for example, I know Japan's security is quite unique than other Asian countries, but if there are lots of Japanese scholars clearly understand what is ontological security studies, suggesting that they may better understand the pacifism of the public movements against the government's interactions about being more armed force. Because whenever it happens, always I'm reading some other Western scholars, and they are, for example, calling Japan as an abnormal, autistic. Like there are this kind of definitions of Japan in the literature, but Japanese scholars said no, it doesn't necessarily be like we are feeling in this way. But in the theoretically, it is they are not enough to say that what was the reason behind it. For example, in here, ontological security can help to establish this kind of bridge, but it needs to be more room to cooperate between the institutional and scholar-wise base of the ontological security studies.
The next question is, Hasan's question is more of a wider OSS literature question, so it's not just Asia specific. So after Vuslat's take on it, if Brent Steele would like to comment on the issue, I mean, he's welcome to. So I'm asking the question. Also, there are a few articles on Africa and Latin America in the OSS literature. It's interesting to think that the Western scholars focus on Asia to some extent, while not focusing on Africa and South America. What is the reason behind that in the OSS literature?
My personal experience behind it, the Asian countries, some of Asian countries are rich to give enough grants to the Western scholars to come to Asian countries to study about their own research. They are giving generous grants. Japan is one of them, Korea, China, Australia, Singapore, Indonesia, they all have grants to calling some Western scholars. I think this is, and the grants also look good on the job applications for the tenure positions. Very practical answer of it. Probably, I don't know the context of the Latin America, but I have a couple of friends working on the Africa. They don't have enough grants and funding opportunity, especially countries, the hosting countries or institutions sometimes couldn't give enough funding opportunities. I think this could be one of it. The second motivation may be more translated works. And the third one is some countries in Asia are very huge impact in globally, not regionally. Japan, China, Australia, ASEAN, when you are talking about them, they are important actors economically, politically, socially, and maybe it raises more interest to them. But if professors still have more contribution, yeah.
No, I just I think you absolutely identified it, Vuslat, that the political economy, the global sort of academic political economy is so important here. And I mean, and then, you know, what is or is not a Western institution I think needs to be understood in a nuanced sort of way, in the way that you're getting at, right? I mean, it could be the case, it very well is the case, that you have scholars who were trained in the quote unquote global north or in the west or whatever, that then were part of the reconstruction or the sort of new transition of particular universities in non-Western contexts, but they're bringing in, if not necessarily Western perspectives, definitely things that are in conversation with Western perspectives. And so it could just be reifying the same kinds of dynamics that you were talking about. I mean, I will say the one thing that I forgot to mention a little bit earlier, but this also is, I think, germane to what you're talking about, very crucial to what you're talking about, is the importance of getting scholars in the same room, ideally in the same physical room, in the physical space. I'm thinking of two particular instances, one that we've implied in this discussion so far, and then the other one that you mentioned in your presentation. In your presentation, you mentioned going to the ISA in 2022 and how important that was to see that, contrary to what you had been told, ontological security was fairly well established, and there were opportunities to be put into conversation and then also critique how, the foundation of how it's been established. So when you came to Nashville, how important that meeting was, and it was for me as well, in terms of hearing new voices. And then also the Koch meeting, a month and a half ago, how vitally important it is to get folks and scholars, especially if we think about the political economy and the dynamics that are happening outside of academia that impact academia, how difficult it is for instance, many Turkish scholars that are here, Turkish-based scholars, because of currency issues or whatever, to be able to get to conferences like ISA or whatever, and how then important it is for folks that are in the global north or the west to come and be able to interact in those settings and to hear the perspectives and the takes and the unique interrogations of ontological security in this case. And I think global IR can do that for IR more broadly, generally, how important that is. And so getting folks in the same space, I think, is really important. Obviously that can't be done because there are limitations in terms of finances and money for everybody, and in terms of time. So Zoom can be a good substitute for that. But that is, I think, so important. It was something that I think you brought up in your presentation, and I think is also important here. And then in terms of like I think then that would facilitate a little bit, maybe just incrementally, exactly the dynamic that Hassan mentions in the chat, that we could have more opportunities for contributions, critiques, reformulations, reconstructions, maybe even just dismissals at a certain point of the foundational sort of assumptions of ontological security studies, as you had that conversation and dialogue happening. So I just wanted to mention that. But I think the political economy in terms of who gets to go where and why is so important, and it's something that we don't bring up enough. I think it's something that we all kind of know, but we maybe don't bring it up enough. So.
Yes, but at the same time, like being in the same room especially for the young scholars, for early career scholars, is especially important, because I told about my story, my limited experience in Japan. Professors don't know what is ontological security studies. But for example, when I went to the ASA, I met with you. I told about my project and I got your feedback. Like there is a chance to get first-hand information from the professors who are the leading on the field. But if I stayed in Japan, how can I get this kind of a feedback? Like this is also very crucial, especially for young scholars.
I guess we covered all the questions. I don't see anybody raising their hands. So first of all, I would like to express my gratitude to Brent Steele for taking active participation. We all enjoyed your remarks and comments. Thank you so much. And apart from that, I mean, it's always great to have such discussions with Vuslat. And thank you for your presentation. I'm sure everybody enjoyed and learned a lot. I did. This was, I believe, such a genuine topic regarding OSS. It was something that broadened my horizon, to be honest. And I'm just wrapping it up. This session is recorded. Most of you must have realized that it will be online. It will be uploaded on our channels on YouTube and Spotify. If anybody would like to go over it again, don't forget dropping a like. So thank you so much and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much to everyone.